Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to day 4 of Global Entrepreneurship Week. I'm your host, Kofi Annan, who I'm leading the California events and the California initiatives and a few of the talks here for Global Entrepreneurship Week. I'm also a founder of Anansi LLC. And today's discussion we're going to be focused on, the topic is designing entrepreneurship. We're really going to be talking about how startup cultures have evolved and the diversity, and how do you create different startup cultures and ecosystems to really embrace different diverse cultures and diverse perspectives. And we have two panelists here, Stephen Ozoigbo and Jesse Martinez. And I'll bring them in now, and we'll start with you, Jesse, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
Thank you, Kofi. Good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing? My name is Jesse Martinez. I'm the founder of Latinx Startup Alliance, which is a nonprofit focused on empowering Latino tech founders. And then in addition, I'm also a venture partner with Republic and also Vamos Ventures. And then my day job is a VP with Anuba Solutions, supporting the Salesforce ecosystem. So thank you for having me here today.
Thank you for joining us, Jesse. And Steve?
There you go.
Yeah,
I should unmute myself before I speak. Hi, everyone. I'm CEO of the African Technology Foundation and the managing partner for the Alliance Africa Initiative. I'm also a venture catalyst by trade with a few portfolio companies between Africa, Europe, and Asia. I'm happy to be here and share some of our ecosystem experiences.
Great. Thank you. And Jesse and Steve, as they both identified, have a really different perspectives on startup culture. Certainly, they have experiences individually as entrepreneurs themselves, but really, they're where they have had the most impact is really on accelerating, igniting startup cultures, startup ecosystems from an investment point perspective, facilitating facilitation between different groups, partnerships, and such. So I'd like to open up with Jesse and Steve, your perspectives on current state of the entrepreneurship. So what are you seeing, particularly, what have you seen change or evolve in the past couple of years? And we could dive into a little bit more recently, but just, kind of your general perspective of the landscape. And I'll start with you, Jesse.
Thank you, Kofi. Well, I've been in San Francisco since '97, and so I've been part of tech for a long time. So I've seen a lot of changes, and given the current state, it's even accelerated even more. And so my journey starts with me coming to Silicon Valley in '97 to work for a startup, Employee 27, funded by Sequoia Capital, one of two pioneers in the web hosting services space. And in less than a year, we go from a startup to part of a public company via 2 acquisitions. So that was my whole intro to the world of tech, coming from Texas. And so, fast forward, as the founder of Latinx Startup Alliance, we started as a meetup group in 2011 with 6 people in the Mission District of San Francisco. Fast forward, we're over 1,000 members globally, and just seeing the landscape change just within that ecosystem has been amazing. So, here we are, 2020, we had the pandemic, we have people that are moving across, not only within the US, but also around the world. And just seeing the explosion of more, tech resources, more diverse founders, which has been really awesome. And so also taking a look at, no longer having to be local, right, with respect to your startup or from an investment standpoint. And so, so it's just, I'm thrilled to see that, and how are the other regional ecosystems going to grow and thrive, given these times that we're in.
And Steve, how have you, particularly since you work with a lot of international founders and organizations, and obviously you're based here in Silicon Valley, what are you seeing as relates to how the ecosystems have grown and maybe some change that how they seem to be changing?
Sure. So, I was born in Nigeria, but I think for me, I got my first startup experience out in Europe, um, supporting ventures and companies on behalf of the government of Catalonia, the Barcelona region. And it was a fantastic experience for me because, as everyone knows, Barcelona at the time, seeking independence from Spain, there was a very dedicated approach towards entrepreneurship and using that as a medium for celebrating Catalan ingenuity. And what that did was it brought out the best of the region in terms of startups, investors, programs, collaborations. I mean, you look at platforms like the Mobile World Congress and the GSMA in Barcelona. These were, pretty much the building blocks for a lot of the mobile innovation that was coming out of the region, and a melting point of such for a lot of mobile innovation from around the world on an annual basis. So that was an interesting experience for me, and it allowed me to see what ecosystems could be done, clusterization, lab to market, what universities can do with marketplaces, what governments can do in terms of direct innovation, what ecosystem players can do and coming together. So when it came back to me to pay it back to my African roots, there was a lot of lessons learned and application, and as well as on the American side. So Alliance Africa by itself is an initiative that was spearheaded by the U.S. State Department, which was also focused on improving and advancing commercial tech and investment relations between Africa and the U.S. And all across the continent. We've ran successful programs within and outside the US-backed silos. Notably, the Demo Africa program, which we ran for a good 7-8 years, was one of the most successful of the platforms. Last year, we were in Ethiopia for Pitch Ethiopia. And pocket by pocket, what we've seen is the last decade has shown remarkable growth for African startups. Remarkable successes, notable successes, and incremental progress. So we're not anywhere in the promised land yet, but for folks like us who started when it seemed like Africa was a challenging topic in the Valley, it is so heartwarming to hear that folks like Jeff Bezos just invested, backed an investment for $30 million into Chipper Cash today, and I mean that's fantastic because these were things that naturally were not attainable a decade ago, and through a consortium of efforts. I mean, you're talking angel investors on the continent, you're talking diaspora investors, you're talking entrepreneurs who are borderless, completely borderless, doing fantastic things across the continent, and we're just very humbled and proud to be associated with it.
Yeah, that's great. And kind of talking about those kind of newer opportunities and kind of some of the trends that you're that you all are seeing. And Steve, I'll start with you because you mentioned so many different initiatives. Are you seeing that those trends and those opportunities are making it easier or harder or indifferent? Like, what's the effect for entrepreneurs? International entrepreneurs, but then even more those who don't necessarily fit the mold. Is it becoming easier? Do you see a trend there?
Oh, I mean, definitely an upwardly progressive trend. The internet by itself, the mobile internet, developer ecosystems, all of those things have helped in driving digital entrepreneurship. 10, 12 years ago, conversations with PayPal around Africa, even from a vendor standpoint, were met with, and very rightly put, were met with constraints around regulation, governance, fraud, and transactional activity. In the last, 35, 40 days, over $300 million has gone into African fintech startups. So if that's not progress, I don't know what progress is, right? And in doing so, you're not just talking about cut and paste type relationships. You're talking about very dedicated Africa-centric, Africa-focused entrepreneurs. In some cases, you're talking about folks who have looked at very hyper-localized problems to solve. And then in some cases, you're looking at teams of people who effectively have been able to attract private or rather local and international investments. So shout out to all the entrepreneurs out there doing their thing, but certainly the trend lines are clear that, in certain industries where Africa was seen as a lagging indicator, the catch-up opportunity was there. Everybody's talked about the leapfrogging effects. Yes, those things are real. And then in certain other industries where it seemed rather opportunistic, I think in those cases as well, entrepreneurs have risen to the occasion. It's far from over. It's far from being a perfect storm, but I'm one to celebrate those incremental progress.
And Jesse, are you seeing some of the same trends as it relates to the opening up of new opportunities for Latinx startups and founders? And is it becoming harder, particularly in the U.S., but then also, as you look at kind of internationally where founders are based specifically, are you seeing any differences there?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. And it's been exciting to see the number of new Latinx unicorns in the U.S. So you have Outreach, you have Drift, you have Mural, and then in addition, you've seen an explosion of unicorns in Latam itself. And so there's probably about 10 plus unicorns now in Latin America. And so when we think about, the leadership and the entrepreneurs themselves building locally and then expanding internationally, it certainly has come a long way, over the years. And then also just seeing the number of funds that are being established as well, as you think about SoftBank committing, $100 million to LATAM, and then thinking about all the other funds that are making the same commitments. And so no longer, given what we were going through right during this unfortunate pandemic, is being able to see the entrepreneurs and also the investments, starting to make those localized commitments, both to the founder and also to the growth of those companies. And so, we'll have to wait and see what happens in a couple of years post-pandemic to see, what success stories we have, and then where is the market trending.
Yeah, that's great to hear. So we're, as you both outlined there, you're seeing a lot of opportunities that are opening up where founders are, both locally and globally. Do you think that the trend of particularly facilitated by COVID and quarantines and just travel restrictions and all those kinds of things, do you think that location for a founder or a startup matters as much anymore? Do you think that that's changing, or do you think that physical location actually matters as much? Jesse?
Well, I think it's a combination of both, right? So one, it's global force changed given the pandemic. And then two, it's going to be a function of time. I mean, we all know that talent is everywhere. And so it's creating these opportunities for those founders, right, that are locally solving those local solutions, and then being able to raise the capital they need to get the product market fit and then scale and grow from there. And so just given a function of time, what is that next place, or do they need to go to a next place? Do they need to move in order to scale and grow their venture to that next level? And so I think it's we have to wait and see.
Yeah, Steve, I mean, there used to be a time, maybe even currently, where a lot of founders, they felt like success meant, moving to the US, specifically Silicon Valley, even from different countries, Kenya, Ghana, some of these hotbeds in Africa who have a startup ecosystem that's growing already. But you had started hearing a lot of times that success was really being defined by the move or the access to Silicon Valley. Have you seen that continue, and having a lot more focus for founders, or are founders now starting to kind of not really look at that as a sign of success anymore?
I think it's a mixed bag, but I certainly would acknowledge that the non-monolithic approach to Africa is where you see a lot of differences, right? North Africa, with general proximity to the Middle East and Europe, as it were, gives it a different type of dynamic for what that Silicon Valley mecca is. And then, of course, South Africa with a bit more sophisticated infrastructure and general ambition, not just for capital, but for corporate type customers and access, gives a little different dynamic as well. Within the Eastern and Western, startups, of course, when you look at the likes of 500 startups, Y Combinator, Techstars, you would find that you would find some usual suspects by country, by location, by sector, right? So what that means is that you can't really say it's an exact science, but you can say that there have been very remarkable contributory factors. It's a remarkable contributory factor that Stripe came out of YC and Paystack came out of YC and Stripe acquired them, right? There's a communal factor to that. It's a contributory factor that, companies will come out here and get the benefit of demystifying the Africa market by pitching directly to investors. But your question asked in the age of COVID, right? In the age of COVID, we almost have this COVID is the global equalizer, right? So everybody now has to live with the lack of a physical address and live with the realities of the time. In 2019, I was able to see portfolio companies from Africa who the founders had never been to Silicon Valley raise money from international investors successfully, right? And do so with products that are now very dependent, or at least being affected by the COVID virus. So what you find is that in the Africa space, take away the monolithic view of Africa, break it down to geographic regions, in some cases break it down to the sectors that the entrepreneurs are in, and then in some cases break it down to the trends across those sectors before we put the umbrella around them to be pre-COVID or not, because it's all down to those granular variables.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that we could see both in kind of the Latinx startup ecosystem and how the players in between, how it's viewed by those who are outside, and also the African ecosystem where there's kind of a grouping, so like all Latin startups or all African startups, and depending on the access that those outside of the communities have to individuals, it can be redefined on how they approach those startups. So for
and in some cases, we've also seen African startups moving over to Latin America, in the payment space. The likes of Migo and Paga. There's been players who, just by jurisdiction, are finding commonalities between these two ecosystems by customer behavior, by regulatory factors, general trends, market opportunity, right? So even within that, you may even find that somewhere down the line, Latin American angel investors might be clusterizing around Jesse to get on a plane to Lagos and do some deals, because it's getting to that point of convergence, right, where the opportunities are very bi-coastal and multi-market.
I agree. There's been a couple of conversations that have surfaced about LATAM working with Africa, and what do we do around investments and also technology, especially around AI. And so again, just early convos, but exciting to hear that come up in our discussions.
Yeah, kind of that South-South investment and collaboration, right? So speaking about the context of that entrepreneurship exists within in different kinds of cultures, we certainly are inundated with the definition of entrepreneurship as it relates to the U.S. or specific, kind of the broader U.S. and not even kind of the local. Talk to me about the redesign or the redefinition of entrepreneurship, if there is any happening among people within the community. So within the Latinx community, is there a need or a feeling to redefine what entrepreneurship is, what a startup is? And then I guess similarly, kind of within the broader African or African ecosystem, are there conversations about redefining that, or is it just, again, from a media perspective, from an entrepreneurship, from a lot of the panels? I know you all speak internationally as well.
Yeah, no, that's a good question, Kofi. And I think what we're seeing, or what we've seen over the years, is startup became a broader term, which also encompassed small business. And so when we have our conversations, we try to talk about tech startups specifically. And so where do you fall? Tech, non-tech? Do you have a tech play? And then what's really been exciting is just to see the growth of the number of investors, right, from accredited, non-accredited, and then having platforms, such as Republic, where you can do crowd investing, and then those platforms opening up as well as supporting a brick and mortar business or your typical tech startup. And so now you have more options, and based on the type of investor you are or you want to be, then you have a number of vehicles that you can leverage, catering to what kind of investment thesis do you want to pursue.
And actually, speaking, I'm glad you brought up the Republic from an investment perspective, because I noticed, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think fairly recently, Republic had always categorized, or at least had a filtering system, let's just say, for the startup opportunities. And is it more recently that they started acting they added kind of the minority led, women led? They seem to be one of the first ones within the investment platform context to add that level of differentiation for investors.
Yeah, actually, they've had that those tags per se since 2016. So we've been an early strategic partner even before the platforms opened up. And so you could come in and be part of an investor group, whether if it was a Women 2.0 or Latino Startup Alliance or others. And so they continue to do that tagging just to highlight those founders, and then also highlight it so that if you're a specific investor looking for a specific entrepreneur or type of entrepreneur, you can find them. What they did announce recently is an acquisition of NextSeed, which is based out of Houston. And so NextSeed is another crowd investing platform, which is kind of open. So it's not just tech, but it's more broad around brick and mortar.
And Steve, are you seeing some of those similar trends from an investor perspective as it relates to investors coming in and kind of wanting to define or zoom in on, like, the kinds of founders, the kinds of, not just on the product, because the product, obviously, each investor kind of has their own thesis as it relates to what they invest in, but the kinds of founders that they're looking at, and the kinds of I guess culturally how the startups are structured. Are you seeing some of that in the African startup?
Absolutely. I think I was asked a question earlier this week by an associate that if every investment in Africa was a social impact investment. And I tended towards a yes, but, because you find that as you're dealing with certain economies and certain situations and certain markets, there is a social an impact underbelly to what it is that you're doing. And what you find is by fragments, certain investors in Africa, or certain investors facing the continent, depending on the source type and breed of capital, choose how to deploy it. And in some cases, they're deploying straight up as impact. In some cases, they're providing grant funding towards some type of impact-driven activity. And then in some cases, they're just pure play VC. But even all the way up to private equity, what you find is as you're developing, higher order infrastructure, when you're a private equity company that's providing fiber optic cable, undersea cable, I bet you there's an impact node at the end of that cable, right? Because that information superhighway, within the internet age, brings with it a lot of impact activity. So those parts of it are pretty critical when you look at the investor landscape. One part that I found quite laudable, and I send a shout out to all of the folks on the continent who are now looking at rolling funds. Jesse, you definitely will know a bit or two about that. My good friend E and Future Africa doing great stuff with that as well. But what you find is that folks are now also kind of almost disrupting the flow of capital by saying, look, let us open up tickets. Let's have minimum 5K investments. Let's create syndicated activity across these type of vehicles, and let's have more inclusive investment opportunities. And while some folks are doing it on a cross-sectorial basis, you find that there's some folks who are dedicated around the kind of impact and sectors and outcomes that they want to see, right? So on one hand, you have governmental agents and kind of the foreign actors who are coming in with what could be seen as development type funds and impact. On the local end, you're finding local VCs raising capital and deploying capital. But I'm quite excited about this new era of rolling funds, especially as it relates to the aggregation of capital, the local context to which a lot of market intelligence can be brought in, and just the inclusion that it brings for a lot of folks to participate.
Yeah, and we have another conversation tomorrow with some folks as it relates to the social impact context, and I agree with you that a lot of U.S. at least what I've seen is a lot of U.S. Investors who are looking into Africa, founders have initially been a lot of times have been introduced through kind of the social impact lens, but then obviously as you start kind of talking through the structure of the company, what the actual product is and everything, it changes. Have you seen some of those changes, Jesse, in the Latino kind of startup community as it relates to investors that are US based versus investors that are looking at foreign startups that are locally based, outside of the US, as it relates to the context of social impact, if that's even a criteria? Is that similar in that case, and if that's changing?
Yeah, I think it's similar in some cases. I mean, definitely, a number of more investors, in both countries, and so or Latin in general, and then also the U.S. And so I think what we're seeing is a lot of more solo GPs, and then also some micro funds. And so, a lot of them are, getting into the game per se, given their networks. And so, on the topic, as Steve mentioned, rolling funds, that's been an amazing vehicle for AngelList. Originally they started out with syndicates, and then that rolled into SPVs. And then, for some, the SPACs as well. And so, there's just so much movement, there's just so much capital. But then, given all the movements that are taking place, certainly diversifying the lens of the investor or investors and what they're looking at. And then you've seen the proliferation of ESGs as well. And so from, the big investment houses. And so I think there's just a lot more activity and a lot more opportunity for those new GPs to step in and, contribute right to the overall ecosystem.
And we must acknowledge the regulatory almost opportunity that birthed this, right? Because when you have the SEC being active around, qualifying accredited investors and ensuring that folks can participate, it really opens the floodgates for participation and allows for this, financial creativity to happen, which is to the benefit of the ecosystems at large. And so when you put that in an African context, what you find is that, if there are any government folks listening or folks who are in charge of innovation, these are some of the things that could happen at a country level, at a municipal level, where folks could now actively start using policy to create attractive environments for financial interactions to happen. It goes without saying that a lot of these things, even in the U.S., are not happening in Alabama or Ohio. You have Delaware creating environments for companies to be quickly put up, less regulation, critical type of activity that could happen in a rapid manner, but taking a few things here and there, not really a copy paste because our legislative environments are different, our regulatory environments are different, but seeing how lessons learned could be applied just to create some measures of magnetic attraction to certain types of ecosystems. It's a long way across even the most sophisticated environments on the continent, but it's certainly there's a will to do, and they're African participants, so why not?
Yeah, and as we're talking about this, what I'm reminded of is for a few years, the couple of times that I attended South by Southwest, one of the things, if you've been there, you kind of know that there's kind of the expo area, and you kind of go there, and obviously there are different startups. But what I've always been interested in is watching the trend of country-based pods. I think in the last one I went to was probably like 2 years ago or so, where Brazil had a huge, physical space, and just kind of the number of startups that they brought as from a policy-based and kind of governmental supported initiative coming to South by Southwest was you could tell that they really filtered the startups and really made a concerted effort coming over here. So the question about that is that, so which countries do you all see from a policy perspective are making those kind of investments in startups / entrepreneurship ecosystems, not just from a just policy, but actively curating and kind of designing the ecosystems with the partners? I'll start with you, Jesse.
Yeah, that's a good question, and it changes year by year. And so we saw the explosion of startups come out of Argentina, and there was a few accelerators back in the early days. And then to your point about the pods, right? We see that at TechCrunch every year, where you have these different pods come in of different government supported startups. And one of the early pioneers was Startup Chile, that led the whole movement, with support in conjunction with the government of Chile and having funding. And then we saw that group move over to Puerto Rico and lead another initiative there. And then most recently, I've seen a lot of movement in Colombia, right, with the Ruta Eñe leading the initiatives there. And so it's going, country by country, depending on, the movement of policy, because, it does take time to make those changes. And then within the U.S., I think it's still, state by state, and sometimes even city by city. And so, for example, my hometown is Houston. And so we're expanding Latinx Startup Alliance to Houston next year. And so we have a partnership with the ION Houston, which is a huge new building that's going to be about 300,000 square feet of innovation space focused on tech and innovation. And, Houston will tell you that, yes, we've been so focused on oil and gas, but we've made a commitment now, to, this new economy. And so we're excited to, lead and support a whole new generation of founders from Houston, from Texas, from those schools. And so it's an overall partnership with the city of Houston, and they've embraced it, across the board.
Same question, yes, Steve.
On the Africa side, a lot of work in progress. You have your usual suspects, but then what you also find is even within, Nigeria's, the Kenyas, the South Africas, the Egypts, Moroccos, you also find that with institutional changes, they're either up or down swings as to intensity and also as to the real desired ecosystem outcomes. So it's one thing for a government agency to say they're doing something. It's another thing for the ecosystem actors by way of the actual startups, the venture partners, and the general angel groups to be direct beneficiaries, or at least in some cases, willing accomplices, for lack of a better word. So I want to chalk it off as being a lot of work in progress. The examples that I gave from my early career opportunities that I had with Catalonia, those are things that I think were light years ahead of their time with regards to how the city of Barcelona and the region of Catalonia was able to piece together a lot of the ecosystem activity to a measure of being a part of foreign direct investment, so attracting investment into the region, but also internationalization and investment activity that pushed a lot of the companies out there. I mean, there are companies I've incubated and set up in Silicon Valley that folks would not even believe. I mean, there's a cork company in Napa, that wine corks, right? But these are natural resources. I don't know if you guys know how wine corks, natural corks, are made, right? But these are natural resources. But there was a reason for the country to back an entrepreneur that was in that space and to give them an option for internationalization. So it may not even be the pure play tech. It's a lot of other things. From where I sit, from a public side, the US CDA, the US Chambers of Commerce, the US Department of Commerce, the US Commercial Service, and the State Department's Office of Global Partnerships. These are folks who are doing fantastic things across non-tech sectors. I think very recently an announcement was made for startups, which is a program out of the Office of Global Partnerships, and there's a Thrive Agri program that's in there that's focused on agricultural innovation between Africa and the United States, right? And there you have it. It's agri-tech, but it's also everything from mechanized farming, agri-tech, down to crop science and tech transfer opportunities for agriculture and food production. So a lot of that comes together on an institutional basis, but it's still work in progress. And then in some cases, we want to have a synchronization of governmental capability, institutional actors, leadership transitions, and then the real effects on the actual ecosystems.
Yeah, that's exciting to hear. I mean, and that's if we're talking about kind of designing entrepreneurship, or at least alternatives and more a broader definition of entrepreneurship, it really is in understanding kind of the local makeup, what's up, the opportunities there. To your point, Steve, about agri-tech versus just kind of regular technology, or even wine tech, or fintech. So kind of looking forward, what are some of you all mentioned Napa, you mentioned Jesse, you mentioned the initiatives in Houston. What are some of the different pockets of ecosystems that you think are besides the usual players that are really kind of accelerating, and kind of what is their what is the makeup there? What is their the focus, I guess, if there's one that an entrepreneur could be attracted to?
Right. Yeah, again, given so this was pre-COVID, and working with the Republic, they launched an initiative called Republic Cities. So their whole goal is to go get hyper local with a specific city to launch a whole entrepreneurship ecosystem. So they did it down in Riverside in around Orange County, and we're looking at doing it in Houston, also in Miami, and then Columbus, Ohio. So there's probably about 10 cities altogether. And so the goal pre-COVID was to go and do it, in person. But now, we're launching them online. So tonight there's actually a launch of Republic Dallas. And so they're going to do a whole initiative around the city of Dallas. And then we'll do one in 2021 around Houston. And then we're exploring Houston and then also New Jersey with LA in there as well. And so, some exciting times.
And Steve, besides the usual players, you mentioned Napa, which is something that's a place that folks that might not necessarily think in the kind of entrepreneurship startup context. Any other states, regions, cities that pop up to your mind that folks should pay attention to if they want to kind of design a different entrepreneurship experience for themselves?
Yes, folks who know me well know that I have an eye for Hollywood and Africa. The entertainment ecosystem for me is very, very broad. Besides the visual entertainment piece, you have a value chain that includes technology, equipment, arts and science, education, And yes, I did say science, education. So we've looked at diversity of investments and activity within entertainment. And what that does is it opens up opportunity, because not only do you have core Hollywood, which is the place, you have digital platforms, the Amazons, the Netflixes, the Tubi TVs. Then you have ecosystem hubs like Atlanta, where folks like Tyler Perry are doing stuff now for the Black community, and you put all that together, and you kind of create a mirror lens on the African continent, and then you find out some very fascinating things. A lot of the Netflix productions that have a Middle Eastern setting, whether it's a castle here or a hill there or a mountain out there, most of those, a lot of those are shot in Morocco. I happen to know one of the leaders of the industry there, who's a female, leader in the entertainment system, and her studio is amazing, and she has Netflix as a steady client. What does that do? Every production that comes into that region, you're talking about job creation, you're talking about hardware infrastructure, you're talking about actual talent production, and a lot of general infrastructure that comes in with it, right? So that's on entertainment. Agriculture is fascinatingly huge. I mean, everything that is sunshine to crop to rain to water management. There's a lot that's going on the continent that we have a lot of best practices here. The universities here need to connect with, or rather, the universities there need to connect with their counterparts here. There's a lot going on with African professors in specific fields for tech transfer, licensing opportunities. As you know, Kofi, the diaspora here, folks who are doing creative things within the academia space, we just need to connect those institutions and look for better avenues for commercialization, right? And then finally, I mean, right now we've seen a big demystification of the education space, right? Whether it's software training and a lot of the stuff that's coming out of even platforms like YouTube, to the developer communities that are now so siloed and defragmented, democratized, to the point where a typical developer anywhere on the continent with an internet connection and a laptop can get educated on various programming languages and get into communities where, if they are willing learners, they can pick up a skill or two, join a team or two, or start a venture or two. So I think the non-monolithic view of Africa offers these use cases where it's never about speaking about Africa as a whole, but you can almost go case by case, country by country, region by region within the continent to derive industry level and geo-specific level opportunities.
Yeah, and I think what I'm hearing between you, Steve, and Jesse also is that there's a lot of opportunity that is not, the saturation is not there yet. So if you want to be in Silicon Valley, the the circle, the physical Silicon Valley, that's fine. But there are a lot of opportunities in smaller areas, in smaller cities in California, and then just also across the world. So there's a lot of opportunity to not just look at the product that you're offering, but the environment that you're working within as an entrepreneur, and how you're designing your experience, your personal experience, and your contribution as an entrepreneur as well. So just for the both of you, so kind of looking forward, in the next 3 to 6 months, what are you excited about? What are your priorities? What's gotten you really excited going through the Christmas and kind of launching into the new year? Where are you spending your time, and where would you hope to be spending your time besides at home? Hopefully not at home. Steve, I'll start with you.
At home. I'm celebrating surviving COVID. I'm celebrating life, health, and happiness. I'm celebrating family. I was on 105 flights last year. So to go through a 12-month period where I was not on a plane is a mild celebration. But I think for me, it's our humanity, right? It's the fact that this virus, this pandemic has taught us new ways to be, and new ways to exist, and new ways to look at things. And We've lost a lot of lives around the globe. There are families that are still mourning, and folks who have lost loved ones, and we're having to deal with all of these realities. Some of the realities of mental health by being so adjusted to this new world. Some of the realities of having a job that is, or being a company owner that is losing productivity. In some cases, you have employees working from home, but productivity is down. In some cases, you're a restaurant owner or a bar owner, and you have no business. So I think all across the world, and call the pockets of non-COVID situations in Africa what you want, but I just think that's a whole different conversation for another day, right? But all across the world, I'm grateful for community, for life, for innovation, for the fact that we are on this side of the divide in the conversation, and for folks who have lived through this year with the pain and anguish of what it is and seen something on the other side of it. Very grateful for that. And for the startups who have found their calling, in the headwinds of this year. I mean, I think wherever they are, I'm fantastically grateful for them, because these type of things are, the crisis, the opportunity inside of the crisis, right? So those are the things I'm grateful for. And I think going into 2021, as soon as we are able to have some semblance of stability, I think there will be a lot of data coming out of 2020. There will be a lot of retroactive analysis. There'll be a lot of white papers. There'll be a lot of content that speaks to what this is. The history of 2020 will be written for a very long time, and I'm excited about that, because even from my young kids, I'm telling them that they're living through a very, very historic period of their generation. So it's fantastic to see. My kids are now, taking digital classes every day, and a year ago we were getting notes from school that says keep them away from the screens. Now take them to the screens, because the screens are the only way they can get educated, right? So here we are. I'm grateful for all of that.
And Jesse, same to you. What are you looking forward to? What are you excited about? Where would you like to be spending a lot of your time? 3 to 6 months from now.
Yeah, and I think I want to echo what Steve said. He covered so many areas. From startup, from ecosystem, from life on Earth perspective. The unfortunate circumstances that we've been dealt, and some were others that have been fortunate. And so there's a wide spectrum, that we're experiencing. And so I think, looking at 2021, it's really, for me, it's about, having that core nucleus around humanity, and from humanity, how does that bring all of us together for the better, and all the work that we're doing, and being able to be conscious and present in the work that we do, and ensuring that we are delivering the right solutions that help the people and help others around the world. And so now that we do have that global perspective, and we are creating that global community, how do we leverage one another in solving some of these issues that we face, common issues, and solving some of the problems that we have in some of our local areas. And so I feel very blessed and grateful. And I think, for me, it's always thinking about, how can I, and then how can we be of service to others, given some of the blessings that we do have.
And I'm excited to work with Jesse going into the year, because, we, as much as we're in these ecosystems, we've never met each other. And I'm always up for some Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Latino mixes, whether it's soccer or food or music or tech. Jesse, I'm coming for you.
I'm here. Likewise.
Well, that's great, and that's kind of what we want to facilitate here with Global Entrepreneurship Week. Just this exchange of ideas across borders, across perspectives, across experiences, so that we could see some of those ideas and some of those new initiatives come out of that. So thank you, Jesse, and thank you, Steve, for sharing your perspective and spending your time with the Global Entrepreneurship Week California audience. And we'll see you going through here, and feel free to reach out to anyone else that's listening in, or some of the audience. Jesse and Steve are online, so just find them and just collaborate on some ideas and some initiatives. Thank you so much.
Oh, great.